Unlike our other videos, which have mostly focused on Civil War military engineering, this one is the first in a series that covers the Pollard expedition, a Union raid where the 97th USCT, an engineer regiment, was utilized as infantry. In mid-December 1864, Col George D. Robinson of the 97th U.S. Colored Infantry led an expedition from the federal base at Barrancas, Florida, northward along the Escambia River to destroy the railroad and rebel supplies at Pollard, Alabama. The force was a combination of cavalry and U.S. Colored Infantry regiments. Several battles and skirmishes were fought on the route to and from Pollard. These included Escambia Bridge, Little Escambia Bridge, Mitchell's Creek, Canoe Creek, and the largest engagement at Pine Barren Ford, fought in the midnight darkness. This video is about the Pollard expedition. The Pollard expedition was intended to draw potential Confederate reinforcement troops away from Hood and restrict the flow of war supplies from reaching him. Additional diversionary movements included Grierson's cavalry raid from Vicksburg, Davidson's cavalry raid from Baton Rouge, and Granger's raid from near Pascagoula in conjunction with Robinson's. Each targeted important Confederate railroad arteries, supplying rebel forces such as the Mobile and Ohio Railroad and the Mississippi Central Railroad. On November 16th and 17th, 1864, just 1 month before the Pollard expedition, Lieutenant Colonel Andrew B. Spurling, 2nd Maine Cavalry, led an expedition from Barrancas to the Pine Barren Bridge. 450 men of the 1st Florida and 2nd Maine Cavalry forded the bayou at Gunboat Point and marched to the 15-Mile House, 11 miles north of Pensacola. At 3 a.m., the force proceeded up the road, running parallel with the abandoned railroad. 3 hours later, at sunrise, they captured several pickets. The column then moved forward and reached the bridge at Pine Barren Creek. The bridge was in very bad condition, having been partly swept away by the river, much swollen by recent rains. An advance guard, dismounted and mounted, dashed upon the rebel camp of the 15th Confederate Cavalry, capturing 38 men, 47 horses, 3 mules, and 75 stands of arms. All the barracks, stables, shelters, commissary, and quartermaster's stores were all burned. Having accomplished what was intended, Spurling's cavalry recrossed the bridge, destroyed of it what remained, and in accordance with orders, started back for Barrancas. They returned after midnight without a man lost or injured. As Robinson's expedition was preparing to depart for Pollard, Alabama, Brevet Brigadier General Joseph Bailey was utilizing General Davidson's pontoon bridge as a wharf at Pascagoula, where the cavalry and trains were being loaded on transports to be taken to New Orleans, where they would be utilized elsewhere. At Fort Barrancas, Florida, the U.S. forces assembled there were made up of cavalry and U.S. Colored Infantries. The 25th U.S. Colored Infantry had been mustered in Pennsylvania and garrisoned defenses at Barrancas and Fort Pickens. The others, the 82nd and 86th U.S. Colored Infantries, had arrived in April and July of 1864 and were originally mustered in Louisiana with enlisted men who had previously been enslaved. The ranks of the colored infantry at Barrancas continued to be filled with men who had escaped slavery from southern Alabama and the panhandle of Florida. Together, the infantry regiments constituted the 1st Brigade. The cavalry regiments at Barrancas consisted of the 2nd Maine and the 1st Florida. The latter included enlisted men who were loyal to the Union and had resided in southern Alabama and the Florida Panhandle. Arriving in mid-November from Fort Gaines was the 97th U.S. Colored Infantry, an engineer regiment, which further strengthened the U.S. forces there. General Granger ordered Col George D. Robinson of the 97th U.S. Colored Infantry, who had been in command of Fort Gaines, to be replaced in command of the 1st Brigade at Barrancas. Upon his arrival, Colonel Robinson put his command through tireless drill. North of Barrancas, Florida, was the border town of Pollard, Alabama. Just 2 miles from the Florida state line, it was a town of about 1,000 residents. At the start of the Civil War, a large military training camp and military supply depot had been established by the Confederacy north of the town. Pollard had a large railroad depot and 30 to 40 small homes. It was the junction of the Mobile and Great Northern Railroad, stretching westward, and the Alabama and Florida Railroad, Alabama, that hauled loads to and from Montgomery. These were together referred to as the Mobile to Montgomery Railroad in federal correspondence. There had been an Alabama and Florida Railroad, Florida, that followed the Escambia River south to Pensacola, but its track had been removed by the Confederacy early in the war. Its roadbed and portions of bridge work still remained. Besides military strikes in the area, bad weather also took its toll on rail and wagon roads. In early November, the Mobile and Great Northern Railroad reported extraordinary floods swept away bridges and earthworks that had stood the test of many years' service. The bridges at Little and Big Escambia, Bushy Creek, Perdido and Bushy Creek were partially destroyed, and large sections of embankments carried away at each of the above-named points. Both Grierson and Davidson's cavalry expeditions included a pontoon bridge train in their column. It was reported that the weather for 10 days has been intolerably rainy, and the whole country is overflowed, the roads knee-deep in mud. General Davidson was unable to use the pontoon bridge east of the Pearl River, stating that all of the streams were so high that the bottomlands were flooded. December brought additional downpours, flooding, and frigid air. The Confederate Engineer Office, Mobile, Alabama. 50 impressed Negroes had been sent to repair damages on Mobile and Great Northern Railroad. Through most of 1864, forces assigned to the Confederate camp at Pollard maintained several small auxiliary picket camps for reconnaissance troops at various places along the Escambia River. Camps at Burnt Corn Creek, Little Escambia, Big Escambia, Perdido, and Pine Barren were all located near the bridges in the area. Additional camps included Camp Lomax near Bluff Springs, Lay's Camp at McDavid, and Camp Gonzales at Gonzales Farm, which was only 15 miles north of Pensacola. That camp had previously included a blockhouse and earthworks, but had been destroyed in July by General Asboth's earlier raid in the area. Stretched thin, the troops were located there to sound the alarm and guard against advancements into South Alabama by the Federals along the coast. Confederate Major General Dabney H. Maury in Mobile, Alabama, commanded the troops there and sent additional cavalry forces to the area in the fall of 1864 due to the heightened threat of Federal activity out of Barrancas and Pensacola, Florida. In late November, Maury sent Armstead's brigade to Pollard. During the December Pollard expedition, the Confederates striking the Federal forces will consist of several cavalry regiments. In December, orders instructed the cavalry regiments at Barrancas to report to Colonel Robinson of the 97th U.S. Colored Infantry. He was now in command of 2 brigades to strike Pollard and destroy portions of the Mobile to Montgomery rail line. The 1st Brigade, under command of Lieutenant Colonel Yarrington, 86th USCI, consisted of the 82nd USCI under Lieutenant Colonel G. E. Tucker and the 86th USCI, Captain Joseph Cale, and the 97th USCI, temporarily under the command of Captain Michael McDonnell. The Cavalry Brigade, under command of Lieutenant Colonel A. B. Spurling, 2nd Maine Cavalry, consisted of the 2nd Maine Cavalry, Major Charles Miller, 1st Florida Cavalry, Captain Francis Lyons, Company M, 14th New York Cavalry, Lieutenant Lanark, and a section of the Mountain Howitzers that were manned by a detachment of men from the 2nd Maine Cavalry. The total force numbered about 1,800 men, of which about 500 were cavalry. Designated as an engineer regiment, the 97th U.S. Colored Infantry had a bridge train and engineer tool wagons attached to them. With multiple damaged bridge crossings on the route and recent flooding in the previous weeks, Robinson was likely aware that the bridge and tool wagons might be necessary to complete the expedition. Records show that Captain McAllister, chief engineer at Barrancas, had received a wooden bateau bridge train complete with chess and trestle wagons in late October. Colonel Robinson's experience during the Red River campaign the previous spring would have weighed heavy upon him. The regiment's pontoon train enabled the Federal Army to advance to Pleasant Hill and over multiple water crossings and retreat to safety back to Morganza. Bridge trains had accompanied the other expeditions of both Grierson and Davidson. The route to Pollard had multiple water crossings, and recent flooding was known to have damaged several bridges. According to post-action reports, Colonel Spurling of the 2nd Maine Cavalry felt that the wagon train would be an encumbrance on the route and argued against bringing the train along. Robinson's force would ultimately include a train that embraced 40 wagons and 6 ambulances, the former carrying 7 days' rations and forage. On the morning of December 13, 1864, the men of the 97th U.S. Colored Infantry received orders to be in readiness for the march scheduled to begin at noon. The regiment began its march a few hours later, leaving camp at 3 in the afternoon. In our next video, we'll cover the advance up the Escambia, the cavalry engagement at Miles Station, and the burning of Pollard, Alabama. Followed by another video in this series covering the dramatic march back, which included the Battle of Escambia Creek, additional skirmishes, and the climactic battle at Pine Barren Creek.